So a few days ago, I asked you all to write some of your Battle Cats hot takes in the community post, and I would compile them all into one video. Now for some of these, I don't have strong feelings one way or the other, but for others, I would like to share my thoughts in some detail. I don't like long intros, so if y'all could leave a like on this video, maybe leave a comment about a hot take featured in this video or your own Battle Cats hot takes, and maybe even subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Anyways, let's get to some hot takes. Golfer is one of the best design units in the game to me, in terms of game balance, at the surface because he looks like one of the sniper units ever, but once you start to notice, he's one of the most unique units in the game. Since his actual standing range doesn't hit the enemies, you can stack him really easily and he won't damage a tanker enemy being used as a stepping stone, unlike units like Manic Macho Legs, Hermit, and Fiend Cat. But despite this, he's not a sniper you can easily use due to the fact he can't defend him, meaning you really have to protect him with a lot of crowd control units. Plus it doesn't help that he's pretty pricey and has a long recharge, but I think that's why I really like him. He's a unit you have to revolve your entire strategy around while abusing his unique strengths and managing his unique weaknesses. He's not overpowered, in fact he's not that great at all, but he's a fun unit to use and we need more units like him since Ponos isn't the best at balancing, since they tend to make overpowered messes like Talented Cyberpunk, the Casleys, and Courier, or a lot of underpowered units, and Golfer is a balanced and unique unit. I agree that Golfer is a pretty unique unit in this aspect in the fact that if you intend on using him, the strategy tends to revolve around him. I have an example of Golfer, or rather Major Leaguer, being used as a key member of the team in the level of my No Gotcha series. Golfer is one of the few LD units that don't hit from their standing range, and as Ramen said, it makes them rather unique. Kachiyama is incredibly underrated regarding its niche value. Guaranteed perma-weaken versus 2 relevant traits with good effective stats by a crowd control unit standards to boot is really nice to have in a ton of stages. Kachiyama is a unit I don't have, so I won't spend long talking about this one, but from what I've heard, the main point of contention with Kachiyama is their speed, as it makes them have a lower effective range due to hitbox clipping, and their high price of 5100 cents, but yeah, perma-weaken against aliens and angels is very useful and can be used alongside other crowd control units. It helps that their true form gains the strong ability. I honestly don't mind multi-hit attack animations. Design-wise, I think they add a bit of flair for whatever unit has it, and it adds more variety to the game. Overall, I think multi-hit makes a unit more unique. It definitely gives units a lot more flair in their attack animations, and for a certain extent, crowd control units benefit from this because they effectively get a longer period to inflict their status, but for stat-based multi-hit units, it tends to mess up the actual damage they do. They tend to deal less damage because of several factors like landing a knockback on the first hit, or their total damage is spread thin thanks to their multi-hit. Maximum the Fighter is a really underrated unit. He's very cool and useful, however it requires boosts, but it came in handy for me still. On stages that require tanks, Maximum the Fighter could be a pretty good cheap tanker unit, but definitely requires some investment since 26k health at level 30 without talents isn't doing much, but with full investment at level 50 grants them nearly 50,000 health. This gives them enough health to be a proper cheap tank that works especially well in Starred Stories of Legend. I even employed Maximum the Fighter's bulk in this video here during one of the stages. There is nothing wrong with units being limited to only be able to get them during a certain part of the year. Something like the Holy Water Gacha, the Bug Nets, or even something like Halloween Gacha Super Rares. Where I agree is if it's a unit that you can get easily with units like Pump Cat or Killer Cat, but units like the Holy Water or Bug Net Gachas, due to the inherent nature of being a gacha, tends to make them difficult to get if you have bad luck. For the seasonal Ubers and the seasonal Neneko variants, sure, I get it, but I feel like the Brainwash units should be more available. I hope once we get Brainwash Titan, they get the Garden treatment in that they're always available in the gacha pool. 4-star Uncanny Legends is incredibly enjoyable. Volta over Bora over Gravi. Metal enemies are very fun to fight. Where I'm at, I have only done one 4-star Uncanny Legends stage, so I can't exactly give a comment about it. I don't have Bora, but I like to use Gigavolta if I need good crowd controller, and Gravolodon as more of an attacker because of their level 4 wave. To an extent, I can agree, but I find they're only really fun to fight if you can minimize the RNG aspect of fighting metal enemies, like with units such as Soba or Summer Neneko. Super Feline at the moment unlocks way too late into the game. User rank 10,001 means you have way more units and options at your disposal, and most likely has gone through most of Uncanny Legends. Not only that, but doing a challenge playthrough like no Ubers or no gacha, definitely no gacha, makes unlocking him much harder. I can see how he might help to star you well though, and the unit itself is a good unit. I just don't like the way user rank works and how it locks you from certain things as a whole. Getting super feline after Cats of the Cosmos is fine with me, but yeah, having to acquire a ridiculous amount of user rank to level it up past level 29 is pretty bonkers. To put this into perspective, if the average level of a person's units was level 30, they would need 334 units to even get an extra 21 plus levels. As of version 11.10, in order to get a plus 60 super feline, you need a user rank of 13,001. This is an average of 434 units at level 30 and an average of 261 units at an average of level 50. At level 29, its stats are laughable for the point of the game where you would actually utilize its abilities, but at plus 60, it's actually starting to come into being and actually somewhat competent and can act as a pocket itty, but by the time you get there, you probably already have itty. To have a different take than game mechanics, we have one regarding unit design. Misra is best girl, and I have my reasons. Her design is excellent. While yes, she's the rich blonde girl usual, but first of all, I'm into that, and second, her design perfectly gives off with the dress skirt thing, to be honest I don't know why that was there, golden flowers, and her battle suit giving her the rich girl energy, and the fact that she has a robo-butler, which also adds to this with him carrying very fancy stuff like flowers, the desserts, and the towel. It doesn't end there. After she lands her attack, she does the Ujo laugh, which I love so much. On top of that, unlike other Galaxy Gals, which just stick with their tropes across all their seasonal variants, Misra branches out a little bit with First Love Misra. I'm not going to explain her design in that form, mostly because it's sort of the same but in a school uniform, which I honestly prefer over the OG. But instead of the Ujo laugh, she blushes and turns away, also making her a tsundere. I know we have like 5 at this point, but I think she does it the best. TLDR, she has more personality than the other girls in the game, but also just has a combination of things I love. Like I said before reading this take, this one is basically about a unit's design. Now, I'm more of a Musashi man myself, but I could definitely see the appeal in Misra's design. I mainly enjoy the Robo Butler because I think it gives Misra a lot of extra charm, and I just fucking love robots. Also, for those who don't know, an Ujo or Ojo is a term used to describe a high-class woman either literally or figuratively in fiction, mainly anime. I think Mechabun is kinda useful and really underrated. I would say this is pretty true only in its true form, as it could work as an Idiolite against low-ranged relic enemies, like Oldhorn. At level 40, it has 15,000 DPS against relic enemies and 176,000 health against relic enemies. The main issue with Mechabun is that it's way too situational of a unit to use. Mighty Wings level 20 is the hardest gauntlet stage. Generally, Cosmic Juggernaut level 20, the one featuring Super Hippo, is described as the hardest gauntlet, and some might even say it's the hardest stage in the game. But when looking at Mighty Wings level 20, you could make the argument that the use of enemies like a 600% Zori or 400% Brawlo spam makes it harder, but I've only done Cosmic Juggernaut, so I personally can't say which one is harder. Empress Cat is actually a top tier unit. Well, I don't know if I would call her underrated because it's one of the most exclusive units in the game and not a lot of people have her. But even then, I don't see many people talking about her when she's busted. That DPS for 551 range is cracked. Even if she doesn't have LD, it's Afro-Delazian tier. And she still has the mini wave. Outside of the 20% DPS boost, it works insanely well with her other ability, Weaken. This is honestly one of my favorite parts of her. Being able to weaken almost any enemy in the field is great. I know it's only 3 traits, but I really like it. It works really well even in Starred Uncanny Legends where weakening enemies is very needed. She even has Curse Immune to counter that Doge base or some relic enemies. And her anti-zombie potential? Yeah, I think it's the most underrated part. Even with talented Therme and Ganglion, she's one of my main units for zombie stages. Her nuker damage allows her to Z-kill frequently, and the weaken is great for zombies. Her HP and knockbacks feel enough to me. She doesn't die instantly. She's also a pretty good Zamel counter, or any enemy with a big range honestly. On the other hand, Behemoth Stones are not hard to get. People just need to progress in Stories of Legend and Uncanny Legends. After you get Enigma level 6, it's a joke. I only play the 3 daily ones in Enigmas when I get them. I have 50 blue, green, yellow, and 80 to 100 purple red without spending leaderships for it. Now, I'm not fortunate enough to be one of the few Empress owners, but weaken against Red, Angel, and Zombie for 551 range is pretty impressive, along with the fact her mini-wave gives her a decent 5.6k DPS. Can't comment too much about her, but I mainly selected this comet because of the bottom bit. I personally would not mind Behemoth Stone grinding if you didn't have a limited amount of plays per day on each of the main 3 stages, but the fact that they are limited does make them tedious to grind. The only egg I'm currently trying to get at the moment is Cactus Cat, as I already have Courier, Mushroom, Supercar, and a few other stone evolutions, mainly because half of the eggs aren't even that great. Getting the Behemoth Stones needed for some of these true forms is insane, like Cactus needing 10 of each cube. I still grind for them whenever I can, but I'm probably just gonna hoard them until the next egg comes around after I get Cactus. People should say damage instead of DPS when talking about nuker or kamikaze units. It's all about one big hit and waiting a while. This I can actually agree with. Take Bahamut for an example. A level 30 Bahamut only has 4.2k DPS, but his raw 85,000 damage is his main appeal. Urarun has basically the same DPS, but her raw damage is a lot lower, that being only 15,000 damage. The roles of these units are different, as one is meant to deal big hits while the other is meant to spam attacks. This idea also applies to Awakened Bahamut. Due to the nature of rushers, they aren't out on the field for all that long, so landing the most amount of damage in quick succession is bigger than a unit's DPS. Even if Awakened Bahamut has 30,000 DPS, he can't utilize that for more than a few seconds, but his ability to be able to land a huge hit of 93,000 damage per hit across a few knockbacks can cut an enemy's health down a lot and is key to beating some enemies, like R-Ost in Realm of Carnage. Hades is one of the best Almighty's Ubers. The Nekulugas aren't as bad as people make them out to be. Garu is actually an amazing Uber. And lastly, Henry isn't as awful as most people make him out to be. And no, this is not favoritism speaking. Hades is pretty good as an almighty Uber, but the main issue he faces, excluding the other better Ubers from the set, is his very small range of 250, as that can bite him in the ass if even the smallest push happens, despite his 425,000 health in his second form. His health talents in his true form help him give a nice 85,000 boost to his health at level 30, but his low range is still the main issue with him. Even at level 50, his 810,000 health only adds so much survivability, and his anti-relic talents are kinda meh, even with the multi-hit, because slow and weaken for 1 second is almost nothing, especially at 20%, and a lot of relic enemies outrange him anyways. Agreed, especially with the crowd control Lugas like Assassin Land acting as a second Cyberpunk on some stages, or Pico Land's long weaken and decent freeze time. As a Garu owner, I'd say he does well enough for his job, but he could have definitely been better. The only annoying thing I find about Henry is his tendency to clog the cat limit. This is why we stan Lil Eraser in this house. Aros and Brawlo are not annoying. Crazed Axe and Lizard are easy stages. Treasure grinding is fun, sometimes. Star Ocean is harder than any post-Chapter 20 Stories of Legend level. Courier is a fair and balanced unit that should not be nerfed at all. I'll let the audience pick at this one. Crazed Axe is somewhat difficult if you lack crowd control options, but otherwise it can be a pretty easy stage with a few ranged attackers. For Crazed Lizard, if you really wanted to wait, just be into the future Chapter 3 to get Awakened Bahamut to rush it. Otherwise, it's mainly an endurance battle. Easy stages are fun because you could try seeing if you could speedrun the stage. Other stages can be a pain, however. I honestly found Star Ocean to be a pretty easy stage, and I definitely think there are harder stages, especially in late Stories of Legend. I have no strong feelings one way or the other, but Courier has definitely been the most divisive unit released in 2022, and one of the most divisive units in general. Gonna say it straight, the new Baron system is ass, at least from a progression standpoint. Before the rework, Barons were separated into 3 different gauntlets, one for early, mid, and endgame. Not only does this expose new players to them and their mechanics sooner, but it's much more efficient for those who are more progressed due to the fact that you could do the earlier gauntlet segments along with the current ones. This I agree with. Most of the new early gauntlet stages can be done by mid-game players, but the last few stages of a gauntlet can border on starred Uncanny Legends territory, and having those 3 distinct separate gauntlet areas could work if they made each area only 10 stages instead of the 20 each one had last time. Cameraman can't only really outclass his other stackable DPS units against Bun Bun variants. I'd rather have the safety and range of Cyborg or Slapsticks. I can see the argument about that, but I find Cameraman's stackability thanks to her cheap price is very valuable. Not sure if this is really a hot take, but I think Kaiji is kinda overrated. Tanking black sucks because of their generally high DPS, and I think it would be more significant to just juggle them with a multi-hit unit like Twin Stars. Also, Twin Stars is super underrated. Great rusher with massive DPS to alien and black, tiny cooldown, plus decent range. I usually see people use Kaiji as an anti-wave unit, but I'm not a Kaiji owner, so they would have to speak about this one. As for Twin Stars, I like to use her as my main anti-black rusher, mainly because I don't have Yukimura sadly. I find she can work quite well against most black enemies from my experience. Brawlos are kind of overlooked. They might seem problematic, but the fact how rare they appear and how weak they are in terms of health makes them not that scary. Lil Bun Buns and Gobbles especially are way worse. Gobble has a different role from Brawlo, but I do see an argument that could form on who is worse between Brawlo and Lil Bun Bun. Courier Cat has become nearly the entire meta since its introduction. It needs to be nerfed. As I mentioned in a previous hot take, Courier has been very decisive, and here's another side of the Courier coin. They made Gen 4 Volcano difficult, to the point of it being unfun. It's like Guided by the Currents, or March to Death in terms of how unfun it is, especially since it's the only source of Yellowstones until Uncanny Legends. They should nerf these stages, because it's not the fun kind of difficult, it's bullshit kind of difficult. For the first few stages, Gen 4 Volcano isn't too bad, but Stage 5 serves as a hard barrier if you haven't beaten Cats of the Cosmos thanks to the 2500% Spacefish Jones. Here are the stats of one without those treasures. The main stage that has been deemed the worst is Area 10 because until we get more areas of the forest and the desert, if you want Mushroom Cat, you have to fight Rajakan, who many have deemed to be one of the most godforsaken enemies in this game, especially thanks to the 10% chance for a level 2 wave. Keep in mind that Bun Bun Symbiote, when you first fight him, he has slightly lower health and a 5% chance to activate a level 1 wave. Also, the point of the volcano being the only area before Uncanny Legends to get yellow cubes is also a very painful fact, because the Enigma stage for grinding cubes is so much easier than some of these stages, but to unlock it, you have to have an Enigma level of 6, which is only acquired after you acquire Dogumaru from Uncanny Legends. I agree about this one. Eraser is a mid unit. After the addition of Jianshi and Rice Ball talents, this poor dude kinda lost his usage. He's good, don't get me wrong, but he is slow and mostly Uncanny Legends magnifications one-shot him anyways. I think Jianshi is a much better meat shield and much more reliable thanks to his speed and his 100% survive. My Eraser is maxed out, so I personally still like to use Eraser to shrink the gap of meat shields, but I definitely see the case where using a talented Jianshi is very useful thanks to their survivability. I personally never really intend on using Rice Ball talents because of my maxed out Erasers, but I still see the value in all of their immunities. Aku enemies are kinda badly designed from a gameplay perspective. Shield Break plays too big of a role in the Aku meta, so much so that anti-Aku meta is solely based around it, rendering anti-Aku attackers and debuffers a bit obsolete and most of the time pointless. And Aku ulters have absolutely no reason to completely disable plus levels. Was it hard to make them act as normal levels? These alters render normal cats and most low cats completely useless in levels that have an alter unless you beat a whole subchapter that for some reason doesn't let you beat the levels in order. I think a lot of Aku debuffers should have a low chance to break an Aku shield, kinda like how almost all anti-zombie crowd control units have a Z-killer. I'd say even a 5 or 10% chance to pierce the shield would make so many Aku crowd control units so much better. As for the Aku alter disabling plus levels, I think that was meant more so to disable the plus levels of rares, super rares, and uber rares, but it did have the negative consequence of making normal and lol cats almost useless in the Aku realms. Misley Syndrome doesn't exist. People just believe they can slap a pixie into an alien stage and win, where they should be treating them like generic backline ubers. You don't want to send out a unit that will get outranged, right? For those who don't know, Misley Syndrome is defined as a unit with both slow and knockback, which both can send an enemy back and lock them in place. Misley, I think, is the poster child of this idea because aliens are usually backed by longer ranged backliners, but this applies to any unit with these two attributes, like these 4 Dragon Emperors. But yeah, I think Misley Syndrome is over exaggerated because Misley can work great as a crowd control unit. It is just a matter of time and place. I will leave a link in the description to a Reddit post that explains Misley Syndrome in a more detailed manner. Jizzo is an SS tier Uber, or even an S tier. He is at least A or B tier. He's really overrated. Jizzo, I would say, is still pretty relevant because of their attributes, mainly a good standing range, but there has been definitely more competition, making Jizzo seem worse or not as good as he used to be, but he's still very good. The meta revolving around Cyberpunk in a good amount of stages makes said stages boring and repetitive. This is how I feel about all the gauntlet stages because Cyberpunk is one of the few non-Ubers you can actually bring to most of these gauntlets. Also, the fact that some stages can be cheesed because of cyber stacking is pretty boring, but for some stages, it's the safest option, like in floor 48 of the Heavenly Tower. Ultra Souls isn't that great of a set. It's still very decent, but for sure not one of the best sets in the game. Jizo's first form has been mostly replaced, and its true form is awkward to use. Sarukani, Gamirion, and Kintaro are good, but not uniquely broken or powerful. Everything else, such as Kachiyama, Chun-Chun, Kaguya, Cosmos, Momotaro, is just alright. In my opinion, just a mess set. The only thing I would find value from is that it counters angels, a somewhat difficult trait. Many of the units in this set all have their strengths and weaknesses, but the anti-angel aspect is what's truly valuable. Outside of Ramakat being a goddamn super soldier against angel enemies, angels are the only pre-relic trait to not be super power crept. Jizo is still a top tier Uber in all forms. Hanzo is a phenomenal Uber who doesn't get anywhere near the respect he deserves. Dark is easily the worst Fest unit. A whole lot of abilities, but that doesn't make a unit great. Nala is usable, but an underwhelming unit with a confused mishmash of roles. Jian is one of the best legend rares. Emperor is a bottom 3 legend rare due to his lackluster role. Cosmo is a top 4 Ultra Soul. Soma is one of the best collab units period. Ultra Atlantis Logistics is arguably the best anti-zombie Uber in the game. Mola King isn't shit. Both Aphrodite and Matarasu are among the lower half of Almighties. Doran is unquestionably a top 3 special legend. Fiend over Housewife. Alright, we have quite a few takes here, so let's deconstruct them. Jizo is still a pretty usable unit, but I wouldn't really call it top tier anymore, as in like triple S tier. Can't comment too much about Hanzo since I don't own him, but Hanzo's freeze is meh for it being only 2 seconds. Pairing it with massive damage is what makes the freeze more of a bonus, and Hanzo is too low of a range to work against the 2 colossal enemies it's meant to be good against. Don't own Dark Iz either, but I think Iz would work great on stages with lots of crowd control enemies. Agreed. I find I can only get some use out of Nala if I have an enemy that can serve as a decent stepping stone, or on stages with lots of peons. I don't own either, or any legend rare, so I can't give my opinion on Jian or Emperor. Cosmo has a nice niche of being a high-range nuker because 56,000 damage at 850 range is pretty good. Granted, his speed makes his effective range lower. Soma is pretty good, as having 440 range with a guaranteed 6-second weaken and slow with treasures and nearly 50,000 damage at level 30 is pretty astounding, coupled with the fact that he has 3 targets, which are floating, alien, and angels. Atlantis' damage is very good against zombies, but his health is so lackluster, even with dodge, that only has a 30% chance to activate. These are pretty good odds, but if they don't activate, there's a good chance logistics won't be seeing the light of day for a while. Their second form is even blessed with dodge, making it even more shoddy to use. Damage output from 551 range is pretty alright, but the main issue is no survivability. It shouldn't be too big of a problem since he has a relatively fast cooldown. I disagree here. Afro's high damage from that far of a range is way too good to pass down until late game, and Amaterasu's ability to nuke most traded enemies quickly is just too good to pass down, especially when she's in her true form with talents. Agreed. When that surge lands at the right spot, you get that sweet 100,000 damage at level 40, and that sweet 6.6 second freeze against relics, which is even longer if blasted by the surge. I personally prefer Housewife, but it really depends on the situation for me. Mitama is worse than both Kazleys, since her abilities are really outdated. She can and will be crippled by Curse, Surge, Poison, and the ridiculously strong traitless enemies in Uncanny Legends. And Ritual Saint Kazley is better than Dazzly. Mitama has a hard time performing in the late game because her immunities aren't up to date, but Slow is still a valuable ability. Ritual Saint Kazley being better than Dazzly is a statement most would disagree with, as most would argue that Dazzly's higher DPS is what makes her better, but I own neither so I can't comment too much. Kai as an anti-Aku is overrated as hell. Her attack animations in TBA is too long, so she tends to miss a lot. Most Aku levels have a lot of peons, so she can't get on the main target, and she can get shredded easily depending on the level. I feel like she's only good on stuff like Aku Empress or Mount Aku. I think Kai works as an anti-Aku shield piercer if you can shovel her in thanks to her high health, but because of Kai's low range, she only works well if there aren't any peons. And for our last take, New O Fortuna over old Fortuna. Hard disagree here for me. The old one sounds cohesive, whereas the new one I found was just kinda thrown together. It might be my nostalgia speaking, but the old one is just better. I have gotten used to the new one, but it won't ever beat the old one. So, those were just some Battle Cats hot takes my lovely audience has provided, and I gave my thoughts on some of these hot takes. Have a hot take of your own? Why not leave it in the comments below, and make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already to show me that this is the type of content that's interesting to you. With that said, have a wonderful day everyone.